Well, I'm excited and thankful to be with you. And what we're going to do right now is I'm going to give you a series of 3 videos that deal with the overview of the Old Testament. And the 3 aspects that we're going to look at is 1, its structure, 2, the story, and 3, the significance. And this really takes me way back when I was in seminary, and I was really struggling with understanding the story of the Old Testament. And I can remember walking into one of my friend's offices. He worked with the navigators and was just saying, Dave, I'm really having a hard time. I mean, I went through the first semester, a ton of stories. I have no idea how they're connected. It doesn't make any sense to me at all. And then I was in the midst of the second semester, and it was not getting any better. It was just getting worse because there was more stories and more things to learn. And I was like, oh, this is not working for me. And so he had this brilliant idea. He goes, Carl, what I want you to do is I want you to take the entire Bible and I want you to put it on one piece of paper. And I thought, okay, Dave, I don't think you were really listening to me because I just told you that I don't even understand the Old Testament. Now you want me to do the whole Bible. And so I walked away a little bit discouraged, but also intrigued. And so I began to think, and it put me on a quest to figure out, can I actually condense the stories of the Bible down into a single page, the entire story of the Bible? And if I can, I think that that's going to help me to actually understand the key elements and key components of the story. And so that's what I've been doing over the last 30 years. And so you are the beneficiary of this journey that God has had me on for the last 30 years, and that I have tremendously benefited for, and therefore I believe you will. So, for this journey to begin, we're going to look at the structure. And once you understand the structure and you have a visual picture of the structure, you will actually be way, way ahead of the game in terms of actually understanding the story, which will be the second video. And then once you understand the story and you can tell the narrative story of the Old Testament, we will introduce the significance of the different movements and the different aspects of that structure. And that will help you to get a rounded picture of the purpose and the intent that God had for the Old Testament. So let's jump in and let's first look at, so I'm going to share my screen. Let's first look at the structure of the Old Testament. And so here we go. If you just think of the Old Testament and its structure, that's the starting point. And so I figured let's get an old map and let's start getting ourselves in the mood of trying to understand this thing called the Old Testament and trying to understand why it is that God did what he did. And so this is what I want you to look at here. This is the framework for understanding the Old Testament. If you're wanting an overview of the Old Testament, this is the story of the Old Testament. I don't want you to worry about anything else except for learning and memorizing the structure. Because if you can memorize the structure, what you can do is you can think of the structure as a file cabinet. And every time you get a story, you have a place to actually put that story. Because what happened to me when I was taking the Old Testament classes, I had no file structure. I had no clarity as to what God was doing. So it's just all these random stories. And it's almost like juggling, if you're doing one ball, that's super easy. You do 2 balls, I can still get away with that. 3 balls, I can start to do it. 4 balls, it's a disaster. Well, that's exactly what was going on in the Old Testament. You give me a story, then give me another story and another story and another story. And pretty soon I couldn't handle any of it. And it was really discouraging, honestly, when I don't think it should have been discouraging. So what we're going to do is I just want to take this video and help you to have time to actually sit down and just observe. One of the best things you can do as a Bible student or as wanting to really understand your spouse or a friend or a situation is simply observe. What do you see? And that's what observation is. So I want you to take a minute, and if you want, you can just you can pause the video for a minute, and I want you to write a number of observations of what you see. And then when you come back, what I'm going to do is walk through the observations that I see that I believe are significant. So go ahead and pause it now. All right, well, welcome back, and hopefully you have taken some time to pause that. And what I'm going to do is walk you through some of the observations that I see and that will help you hopefully to understand. So excuse me, but the first one I see is it reads like a book. So we're gonna move from left and we're gonna move to the right. So we have a cloud and it's green. It's a different color than all the other things, okay? So that tells me that something significant happened at that point. The next thing I see is there's this red arrow that's pointing down, and it's very big, and it's red, and it's different than all the rest of what I see. But I do see some other red things that that will help us tie some significant events together. But we have this red arrow going down. Then I see a series of four rectangles, right? One, there's first three are all the same size, and then the last one is a smaller rectangle. That's not super significant, except for the fact that maybe it's a shorter period of time in that third one or the fourth one. But what I really want us to do is just remember there's four boxes. The third box actually is the one that seems to have the most activity, right? It's got the spiral going down. It's got a diamond on the inside. Okay. And then when you get to the fourth box, there's a split. It seems like there's some kind of split where we had this very linear movement of boxes, and now we have a box on the top and we have a box on the bottom, a rectangle on top, a rectangle on the bottom. And then we have a lighter rectangle that just extends all the way through with three different parts to it. And we'll look at that in a minute. And so the next thing we notice is that we have this red dotted line that is a rounded rectangle, but it's dotted, and none of the other things are dotted. So I'm not sure why that would be dotted. So we'll want to try to understand why that's dotted. And then all of a sudden the two boxes, well, actually, if you look at the two boxes, one is shorter than the other, right? And so we'll want to try to figure out why that is. And then also we see that there's two more red arrows that give way to those two boxes. And when we look at that spiral, that's also a red arrow. So it seems like we have 1, 2, 3, 4. We have like four different kind of red arrows, and then we got this red rectangle with all these dots around it. So that red is trying to help tie something together for us. And then finally it gives way to this final box, but it's one box and not two boxes. So somehow those two boxes have come together. And then what you see between the two boxes that go into that one box is you have this one very thin three-segmented rectangle. And that is also significant that there are three segments, and each of those segments is at a different length. So that's pretty much what you see. And what you want to do is you want to commit this to memory, because by committing it to memory, what we're going to do in the next one, when we actually look at the story of the Bible, we're going to begin to give you some markers or some labels for each of these boxes. And once you have those labels and you have this structure memorized, you will actually have the story of the Old Testament memorized. And you can do that very quickly, and then it's a matter of saying, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add detail. So if you think, I took an anatomy class when I was in dental school, and one of the things you have to do is you have to learn the skeletal system. And once you learn the skeletal system, then you begin to know where everything's attached and where the organs are in relationship to all the different parts. And this is like the skeletal system. It's going to orient you. It's going to then serve also as a file folder holder. So as you get a story, you can stick that story in the right place. And then you can and then you have the ability to also, back to that analogy of the balls, able to juggle the balls. So please take time to memorize this before you move to the next video, which is the story. But once you get this memorized, you're good to go. So there's a cloud, four boxes. That third box has a diamond in the middle, and it's got a spiral on the outside. The fourth box yields two arrows, and then you have two more boxes that split off. Then you get into this red dotted box, and then you end with a single box. Then right in the middle of that, you have one rectangle that's divided into three places. Not super complicated, but 100% will help you to dial in what the Old Testament is about. So I hope this is helpful, and by faith that you're going to go ahead and take that next step, which is to memorize it. When you do, I'll see you in the next video where we look at the actual story of the Bible. All right, thank you.